To Kill a Mockingbird, Chapter 2. This is the 7th video of this chapter. So let's, after our important digression on literature in general, let's resume our reading. Miss Caroline was no more than 21. She had bright auburn hair. Look, auburn hair is a hair that is between, let's say, red and brown. Okay, it's a mixture of red and brown. Right? The term is pretty interesting because it started meaning a kind of white, you know? It started meaning a kind of white, so it's like whitish. You know, like the color of linen, you know, that would originally mean auburn. But with time, it changed to brown red, a color between brown and red. And then you may ask me, how is it possible that a word that is kind of white now means something so different, right? And the answer is, in that specific case, there was another word in Middle English that, if I'm not wrong, was brun. You know, so there was the original word that I think I have it from Latin, that is alburnus, you know, and then there was another word not related from Middle English that was brun, you know, and because of that word, the Latin word was influenced, and people kind of overlapped the two words, you know. Well, but the important aspect here is the color, right? And remember, we mainly use this adjective for hair, right? So she had auburn hair, pink cheeks, and wore crimson fingernail polish. Crimson is deep red in color, right? She also wore high-heeled pumps. Pumps is a kind of shoe. The regular high heels, you know, are high-heeled pumps. And red and white striped dress. She looked and smelled like a peppermint drop. Look, you have to understand peppermint drop in order to visualize, you know, Miss Caroline. And then I want to open a parenthesis here to call your attention to a very important fact when you are reading literature. If we say paçoca, like here in Brazil, or if we say, I don't know about your culture, your state, but suspiro, for example, or if you say traquinas, for example, you know, most of people will immediately, you know, get the reference, you know, because it's something very common in our Brazilian culture, right? I know, for example, that very frequently we call a person who has like a fat face, you know, we call cara de traquinas, right? Ah, olha a minha cara de traquinas, eu tô muito gordo, olha a minha cara de traquinas, right? Why am I telling you this? Because let's imagine I'm learning Portuguese, right? And then I'm reading this story, and in this story somebody says a menina estava com cara de traquinas. And then I go to the Google, and then I find that traquinas is a kind of cookies that is sold in Brazil. And then, you know, it's okay. It's a cookie face. It's kind of strange, but let's go on. You know, but it's much more complex than that. Language is much, much more complex than that, you know. If you get traquinas, for example, you see a small face there. There were commercials, I think, in the 90s. No, I think it's already in the 2000s, you know. Commercials with kids with a big traquinas face, you know. And all of that is underlying the reference, okay? Of course, I can understand just by knowing that traquinas is a kind of cookie in Brazil, but if I want to go deeper into the experience that the natives have, then I have to see those things. Okay, so why am I telling you this? Because sometimes you have to know certain brands, you know. Every time you have to go deeper in anything, but in brands specifically. If you read Stephen King in English, you see that he has lots of references to that, you know, lots of references to specific things you would find in the United States, and this is a lot troublesome, you know. It will give you a lot of work, but it's so nice because you're getting inside of that culture, and then you are little by little breaking, you know, the barrier between your culture and that culture. You were being able to enter that culture. So in the end, it's something very beautiful, you know. So it's impossible to really read something deeply if you don't understand the culture. And culture now, I think it's important for you to realize, we're not talking about just literature. The culture, I don't know, the regular food, right? For example, it's a very common cultural aspect of my family to talk about bala de hortelã, right? Why am I saying bala de hortelã and not peppermint drop? Because our bala de hortelã is a specific one. It has, you know, green wrapping paper. It is green as well. It has, you know, an oval shape. So if my family, for example, because my mom loves that, you know, if my family, for example, makes any reference to bala de hortelã and you don't know that exact thing, then the communication will be lost, right? Digression of the digression. It's because of those little, very little, tiny things that are pretty important, you know, and the accumulation of those very little, tiny things. It's because of that that many people believe there is no communication, right? And my answer is, of course there is communication, but it's very hard. It is very hard, all right? Well, keep that in mind. Now I'm closing my digression to tell you that it's very important that you Google peppermint drop, right? Peppermint drop is a kind of drop that is like a disc shaped, like a pug, you know, like a hockey pug, you know, like a disc, right? It is all white and it has red irregular or curved stripes, right? But it's very nice to get the picture because, so stop the video actually, stop the video and Google the picture, because then everything makes sense, you know, here. So I'm going to reread this part. Miss Caroline was no more than 21. She had bright auburn hair, so we're talking about red hair, pink cheeks, and wore crimson fingernail polish, very red fingernail polish. She also wore high heel pumps and a red and white striped dress. She looked and smelled like a peppermint drop. She boarded She boarded across the street, one door down from us. Here, board is not the board like board school that I misread here, but when you board a place, I have the definition here. I hope I have. It's somewhere, but it's there in your Quizlet, okay? You will find it. You spend some time as a guest in a place, not only sleeping there, but also he's receiving food, you know, and other benefits. It should be in the order here, but well, border. So it means that she was renting a room, you know, in this Miss Maudie Atkinson's house. But not only she would get the room, she would get, you know, the meals as well. All right, so she boarded across the street one door down from us in Miss Maudie Atkinson's upstairs front room. And when Miss Maudie introduced us to her, Jem was in a haze for days. So remember, when you are in a haze, you are you can see very well, right? Imagine you are taking a strong medicine and then you can't just organize your thoughts so well, so you are in a haze. So my first question for you is, why do you think Jem was in a haze? Answer. Well, because he's a boy and she's a woman, she's a young woman, and she's very attractive. You know, probably he's used to, you know, those country ladies there in his town, and then suddenly you see a woman that smells wonderfully well. She is all dolled up, you know. She smells of peppermint drops, and she wears high-heeled pumps, you know. So that's why he couldn't think straight for some time. Miss Caroline, so going back, there was the digression introducing Miss Caroline, right? Miss Caroline. Now we go back to class. Miss Caroline printed her name on the blackboard and said, "This says, I am Miss Caroline Fisher. I am from North Alabama, from Winston County." Well, by now I think you remember that in the United States you have a city and the towns, you have the county, and then you have the state. So there is a division between state and city or town. Another interesting fact here, Miss Caroline in a moment will say, we don't write here in the first grade, okay? We print. So that's interesting. When you print, you write, you know, with printing letters, right? So you don't write with cursive letters, right? So very frequent, but they don't say write your name. For example, the exam, the TOEFL exam I apply here, there's a form we have to fill out. They don't write something like write your name with printing letters. You know, that's not like that. They just use it as a verb. Print your name here. And it's interesting because I remember once somebody was applying the test and asked me if they had to put the document in the printer. No, you print your name, you don't write with cursive letters, right? Okay, so she printed her name on the blackboard and said, "This says, I am Miss Caroline Fisher. I am from North Alabama, from Winston County." The class murmured apprehensively. Should she prove to harbor her share of peculiarity indigenous to that region? Should she prove? Should she prove? In this context, of course, it would amount to something like there was a chance that she would prove to harbor, to have her share of peculiarities indigenous to that region. We have to go back to that sentence in a moment, because share of peculiarities indigenous to that region. So first we have to understand what are the peculiarities. Indigenous mean like natural, coming from North Alabama, more specifically Winston County, right? And then we have a nice parenthesis there to explain to us what is the narrator referring to. When Alabama seceded from the Union on January 11th, 1861, so remember we are talking, of course, about the Civil War in the United States, right? the War of Secession, right? Why secession? I put there in our Quizlet, because secede is to leave or withdraw. The War of Secession, of course, is when the southern states, you know, a part of southern states and other states, you know, try to get away from the rest of the United States. So instead of getting away from the rest of the United States, because getting away, you have the impression that they would pack their things and say, I'm not going to live here anymore. No, they try to split, you know, they try to leave the Union. They try to, the correct term for that is secede, right? So we are talking about the War of Secession, right? Okay, so when Alabama seceded from the Union on January 11th, 1861, Winston County seceded from Alabama. So be careful. Let's try to understand this. And every child in its head. Okay, so in 1861, Alabama, as a very good, typical southern state, seceded with all the other states from the Union, right? Remember, they wanted to maintain slavery among many other things, right? Of course, you have to always think of the southern state as more, I don't know if more traditional, right? But more based on agriculture and therefore needing much more slaves than the North, right? Okay, so Alabama seceded. We want slavery, they said. Of course, I'm hugely simplifying the thing, I'm sorry. But then there was a part of Alabama that seceded from Alabama. So it means that they were akin to the North, right? So they had the values, the progressive vision of the North, right? Okay, so Winston County seceded from Alabama, and every child in Maycomb County knew it. North Alabama was full of liquor interests, big mules, steel corporations, Republicans, professors, and other persons of no background. Okay, didn't respect tradition and etc. Let's go by part. Liquor interests. So of course, liquor, we're talking about alcohol, and the idea is, you know, they at that part of Alabama, they commit a lot of crimes. They are partying all the time. They are sinning all the time, right? All right, let me see the notes I have here. One word you have to know that is not here is a power broker. I think power broker, yeah. Let me read the definition. What is a power broker? A power broker is a person who exerts strong political or economic influence, especially by virtue of the individuals and votes he or she controls. It's very easy for us Brazilians to understand that because we remember the time of coronéis, right? I would have my engenho, right? I would have my farm, and there would be a lot of people that would work for me, not slaves anymore, would work for me, would live on my farm, that would be strongly influenced by me, would need my political power. And then remember the typical idea of coronel, that you would take the voters to a place, there would be a guy there with a gun just checking if people would vote the correct form, you know. So the correspondent of that in the United States would be a power broker. Why am I telling you this? Because big mule is the political term referring to modern Alabama power brokers. The power brokers in Alabama are called big mules. So that's the problem with the north of Alabama. You know, there were liquor interests, big mules, steel companies, Republicans. Nowadays, we see, of course, in the United States, you have the Democrats, right? The Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And we see them and we think, because they fight for political causes, they started the movements, of populist movements and things like that. And we would never imagine that, historically speaking, the Republicans, not the Democratic Party, right? Not the Democrats, defended, I don't know if the abolition, the end of slavery, but at least not the extension of slavery, all right? Because usually the kind of speech the Democratic Party tries to throw on the Republican Party is exactly this. You hate black people, you just want the white supremacy, and you just want you just pay attention to rich people, you ignore minorities and things like that, okay? I'm not, of course, defending one or the other, I'm just saying that it's political discussions are much more, always much more complex than we can post, on a 5-line post, So they're much more complex than that. So let me just read the definition I put there in our list for Republican Party and Democratic Party. The Republican Party, remember the Republican Party, the party from North Alabama, those guys who didn't want to be with the rest of Alabama, seceding from the United States. The more conservative of the two major political parties in the US, established around 1854. One of the two primary political parties of the United States, organized in 1854, I got two sources, that's why you have the repetition, to oppose the extension of slavery, okay? So that was the idea of the Republican Party, to oppose the extension of slavery. And the symbol of the Republican Party is an elephant. Very frequently you see in the elections, right? An elephant that is half red and half blue. Now, the Democratic Party, the symbol is a monkey, and then again half red, half blue, right? And then we have the definition, the older and more liberal of the two major political parties, so named since the 40s, 1840s, okay? Well, so North Alabama was full of liquor interests, big mules, steel companies, Republicans, professors, and other persons of no background.